Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Open Source in Business, which is a speaker series where we kind of cast a wide net on the various topics related to the business of open source. And this week, I'm joined by Alison Gianotto, also known as Snipe, or Snipe-IT on Twitter, who is the CEO of Grockability, a company that develops and delivers hosted services for the Snipe-IT open source project, and Roberto Galoppini, who is the director of strategy for Filezilla, a very popular open source file manager, I guess is how I would describe it. So thank you both for joining us. The topic today is bootstrapping a self-funded open source company, which is probably one of the most common ways that people start a business around open source behind getting a job. And you're both CEOs of your respective companies. Both have started companies around a specific project. And I think you both have interesting approaches to scaling the company and generating revenue opportunities from it. So let's dig in. Alison, do you want to give me a brief introduction of the genesis of your company? How did you come to start Grockability around this project, which was, as you said yourself, a side hustle that turned into a main gig?
So starting the company or starting the project?
Start with the project.
Okay. So I was the CTO of an ad agency in New York City, and I had not taken vacation, and I was supposed to take vacation. And we were also about to move offices. And so we had to do inventory. You can't move stuff if you don't know what stuff you have. So I tried out a whole bunch of different asset management systems, all open source, and I hated all of them. And so I took my vacation and basically coded for 2 weeks straight and came up with kind of what I thought met my needs and released it on GitHub as a 0.1 alpha, something like that. And then just kept noodling around with it. And I did not think anyone would be interested in it because there were more mature products out there. But sure enough, people were like starting to request features and stuff. I'm like, there's other stuff out there though. and so that was cool to get people's momentum behind it. I think, for something like this, asset management is always going to be kind of every company is going to need something different. And so even though it's a really crowded space, I built something that met my needs when other products didn't. And apparently that resonated with, with a whole bunch of other people as well.
And you took a pretty unique approach. Like asset management is one of those boring niche areas
where
a lot of
he's up. It's my company you're talking about.
I'm sorry. It's kind of a niche area. It's typical enterprise software, right? And UI is not something that these projects are known for typically. And you come from a different kind of environment. I found that a kind of an interesting aspect of Snipe-IT.
Well, I mean, I'm a bit of a Swiss Army knife at any rate, and I like to make software that is usable. And my philosophy has always been, you can have the best software in the world that does all kinds of amazing things, and if people hate using it or can't figure out how to use it, it really doesn't matter what your software does. And so, in terms of software development, it's always been kind of UI first and user-centered design. It's also something that I really enjoy. And so I think one of the reasons why we got ahead was because all of the other open source asset management systems, and in fact, a lot of the closed source asset management systems are absolutely miserable to use. And like I was that IT desk jockey at one point. I don't want to have to use miserable software. I want to use this is already, as you say, boring. So I may as well, make it. There was actually a point where I had randomized haikus in the corner. So each time you'd load the page, it would be some sort of nerdy, like IT related haiku that I just thought would kind of cheer people up. But then as the project got bigger, especially for non-English speakers, they thought it was like instructions or something. And so I'd get a couple of tickets like, I don't understand what this means. And I'm like, oh, never mind. This is why we can't have nice things. So I actually had to pull that feature, but I might bring it back as a setting that you can turn on.
I'm sorry to have said boring. That was the wrong word.
It's okay. I'm for a CEO, I'm a terrible. People are like, what does your company do? And I'm like, so it's not very exciting. And my CTO was like, you have to stop that. Okay, like seriously, you have to stop that. I'm the worst at the elevator pitch because, you know, for some people it isn't boring. For me, the love of creating the product makes it not boring, but I also empathize with a lot of people who are not particularly interested in asset management, who kind of get stuck doing that job. So I try to make it a little less miserable.
So how long was the lag between creating the project and publishing it on GitHub and starting Grockability?
So the project itself is about almost exactly, I think, 8 years old now, 7 or 8. I think I published the alpha release 2 weeks after I had created it, and then it took another 2 or 3 years for it to actually turn into a company.
Okay, and what was the tipping point? At what point did you realize that you could potentially make money out of hosting Snipe-IT instances?
Oh, I didn't. My husband wouldn't shut up. He's like, you should charge for this. And I'm like, that's stupid. Why would anyone pay for something that I literally give away for free? He's like, for hosting it. I'm like, first of all, I don't want to be a hosting company. And second of all, why would anyone do this? It's not that hard to install. And so to get him to shut his yap, I put a PayPal subscription button on our project website. You know, of course, expecting to be proven right, like, ha, 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 see, I told you, months later, and we haven't had a sign up. And then 3 days later, we had our first customer. And I'm like, damn, all right, well, I guess we're doing this.
So some of the milestones for a new company is like quitting your old job, going full-time into the project / new company. And then the next big milestone is your first hire. How did that evolution happen for you? Like, what was the time scale? How did you decide that you were going to hire somebody for the first time?
So I was the CTO and co-founder of a different startup that was not, we'd already run out of runway and we were kind of struggling to figure out how we were going to make money. And so the transition of not making money to making money was not actually a difficult one. You know, it's like, okay, well, and I tried to kind of dual track that for a while. And then eventually the Snipe-IT project was becoming profitable enough and was taking up enough time that I just had to basically say, I'm sorry, guys, I gotta follow this thing. You know, it's actually, I can't do both anymore. And so I stepped down from that role. And then the first hire, I think, was about 7 months later. And it probably should have been 4 months later based on how exhausted I was. You know, but as I've said before, it can be really difficult to know when you need help, and you only realize how much you needed help until you actually get that help and you're like, oh man, I can breathe again. Holy cow. I can't believe how much better this is. And of course, when you first hire somebody, that's not true because you have to train them up. You have to tell them all the things that you know. And, you know, there's obviously every hire is an investment. But once they're settled, and my first hire, who is now our COO, you know, I basically was like, this is trial by fire. Just watch me and do what I do. And, you know, on the help desk and stuff like that. And she fortunately is brilliant. And so it didn't take her very long to get settled in and start to really become a powerful ally.
So Roberto, you come from a slightly different track. You worked advising companies on open source strategy back in the maybe over a decade ago. You worked for SourceForge for a number of years, and then as SourceForge changed their business, they let all of the team that was working on community enablement around SourceForge go, at which point you started the company, which is primarily focused on Filezilla now. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically what happened is that, as you said, when the company changed hands, many of us left the company or were invited to. And actually, I've been working with many open source projects when I was at SourceForge, even before. But speaking of the last years, I think I've been helping over 150 projects in different ways to be successful. I've been sitting in some advisory boards, I helped others with marketing and so on. So among all these projects, one of them was Filezilla, and it was to me the best candidate to work with because it was the pure classical open source project led by one developer with tremendous opportunities to grow, also financially speaking, so in terms of sustainability. And as I was telling you before, just before the call, it took zero days to decide to go live. We met once, we spent a day discussing ideas, how we could make this profitable, how we can make sure that we do not try to upsell our own community. And that is a very important topic, as you can understand. And eventually we started, the company was cash flow positive, I would say 20 days after we started. But as I said, the project was already there. It had, I think at that time, more than 15 years story. So it was already a huge success in terms, right, at least of audience.
So that it's an interesting case. Is a Filezilla is this, anybody who has been around SourceForge a decade ago knows that Filezilla was like the #1 downloaded project on SourceForge. So it's got a huge audience, but you weren't the developer of the project. How difficult was it for you to craft a business relationship with the developer of the project as director of strategy, and how has that relationship worked out?
The fact is that having been, I think the role was SourceForge Senior Director of Business, but basically it was head of community, helping projects to grow. So I earned many developers' trust doing this, helping them. So in that respect, it wasn't difficult to be credible to the developer eyes. The fact is that some choices we made back in time that might sound obvious today weren't so easy. For example, when we decide to have the Pro version and sell the Pro version, what is going to stay in the free version and what is going to be in the Pro version? So decisions like this were very important, and we spent a lot of time deciding how to do this. And eventually, I mean, in this case, the solution seems simple today. Like everything that is about the cloud is going to be in the Pro version, and everything that is about FTP, FTPS, and SFTP will stay with Filezilla. But for example, a number of innovations we brought in the Pro version has been, let's say, backported, if I can say so, to the Filezilla version as well. So Filezilla benefits in some respect of what we do with Filezilla Pro. But as I said, the business part was thinking out of the box how we could make money. And I think in some respect we have been innovating, but not the fact that we have a Pro version.
Right. I'm just curious, are any of your Pro version features like closed source, or is everything open source and the value is just in the build?
We don't have closed source bits.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to see if you would characterize Filezilla's model as an open core model, or is it more like a pure open source, and you create, as I said, the differentiation in just creating a professional versus a basic build and bundle?
I would say that in this respect is similar, even if different sides, to the Red Dot model that is pure open source, but a strong emphasis on protecting the trademark. Okay.
That's been a theme in this series, actually. So to go back to Alison, I'd like to talk a little bit, compare and contrast both of your strategies for growing revenue and using the open source project as a business development tool. Alison, can you talk through how you've grown the company? I mean, you're up to 6 employees, you said? We can't hear you. I can try and toggle your mic from here. Did that work? While you're figuring that out, I will go to Roberto. Roberto, one of the most interesting revenue development, like you talked about being a little bit innovative, the revenue partnership that you've come up with around storage, and specifically the company Storage with a J. It's an interesting story. Can you explain to us a little bit how you've crafted that relationship, what your motivation for it was?
Okay, maybe let me do one step back, explain how we get to partner with them. So at some point I was thinking, how could we possibly make the advertising business for us work and work for the stakeholders, for the end users as well. So the idea was, what about finding someone in the cloud space that has an innovation technology that brings something that is not available today to our users, so that we can make money out of advertising business, but at the same time we can provide interesting new features to our user base. So I was looking specifically for cloud storage solution that weren't, of course, the big giant companies, but that were offering something new. And it was kind of natural to look into distributed cloud solutions. And among them, there were a bunch, actually, coming out of a blockchain hype at that time. And so I spent some time analyzing what might be a good fit from a technical point of view. And eventually we decided to go with storage just because it was a better position, technically speaking, even if financially speaking, at that time, it wasn't the best choice. And so we decided to partner with them. It took, I think, about 7 months to get first alpha out. And the way we've been shaping the relationship with them was innovative also in this respect. Like we decided not to be paid in dollars, as it might be the most natural thing to do. But since their technology was relying and is still relying on a utility token that they created, so basically they produce their own currency. And they share this currency with all the people that decide to be part of this sharing economy in the proper sense, like people sharing part of their hard disk and their bandwidth to get a cut of what storage is able to do with that. And so we decided to be paid in tokens. And that was, I think, a win-win on both sides, because the company could retain their financial resources to pay developers and so on and grow. And we were able to get these tokens and wait and to see the value of these tokens growing over time.
I'm interested to dig into that a little bit more, but I'd like to go back to Alison.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent.
Yes. So, revenue strategy, your growth strategy. How did you? Is it crafted, or is it accidental? Like what kind of level of thought have you put into?
Kind of both. So once we decided that we were actually going to take this as a commercial venue, basically I looked at all the other, let's say, comparable open source projects out there that were charging, and even the closed source projects out there that were charging that had similar feature set, and I undercut them by $10 a month. That was where we started. I'm just like, well, we're basically the cheapest and we're the best. So it kind of gives you no place to go from there. Also staying really active in the open source community, staying active on GitHub, really making sure, so we've seen a lot of people, we have had customers who have canceled because they're going to self-hosted, but we see more people moving from self-hosted to hosted. And just for those that don't know, we have kind of two different revenue streams. One is pro support, and one of them is hosting, either annual or monthly. And we get more people moving from self-hosted to hosted than we do the opposite direction. And what I love about that is these are people who already know our product. They already like it. They've already been trying it out. They just don't want to deal with updating it anymore. And So like those are kind of my favorite customers because there aren't any mysteries. They already know what they're getting and they like it enough that they just don't want to hassle with maintaining a server that manages it themselves. We do know that we are leaving some money on the table here, and so probably in the next 6 months or so, we're going to be expanding out our SKUs to an enterprise support level, which will be much more expensive, and probably some level of dedicated hosting. We've got a couple of customers. There was a perspective yesterday that came through. I think they run an IoT shop, and they had something like 500,000 assets that they wanted to manage, and each one gets checked in and out 6 times a day. And you know what? Like that's not. We can build that. We can build that for you in terms of a hosting environment that would be better conducive to that. But you know, for most people's purposes, that's kind of outside the scope. And so a dedicated solution is in the works. My CTO and I are kind of working on how that would work, how we roll that out, because we would need it to fit into the same deployment system that we currently use for our hosted customers. We can't have any special little one-offs because those always turn into foot guns. And so it's a process of figuring out what that architecture should look like, but also enterprise support where we get people who are building their own bespoke PowerShell scripts and Python scripts and browser extensions and all kinds of other things. And they're asking us for a much deeper level of code integration with our API. And it's like, dude, for $50 a month, it's kind of not my job to debug your Python code, you know? And it's not even that it's not my job. It's very difficult. It's very time consuming. And so I think that would fall under the enterprise plan where it's like, okay, we will actually help you with your integrations. We will actually help you do this, but our time is also valuable. And the time that we're working on this, we can't work on other things. So
do you offer support on self-hosted Snipe-IT, or if you want support, you have to be hosted? No,
so we offer support only, because this is kind of an enterprisey product. A lot of people, their security policies wouldn't allow them to work with us to store, for example, license data with a third-party vendor. And so we have a pro support plan where it's like, if you want anything outside of what we can give you on GitHub, then you need to go pro support. Pro support is actually more expensive than hosting because it's a lot easier to troubleshoot stuff on our servers where we can see the log files, we can see configurations, everything is sort of standardized on our end. But you're running this on a Raspberry Pi in a desk drawer somewhere. It's going to be really hard for me to figure out what you might have done to make the situation that you have. And so we have 2 different plans, but yeah.
So it was one of the things you said there that is really interesting is that you see more people going from self-hosted to hosted solution than you do leaving the hosted solution and going to self-supported, self-hosted. So do you see the open source project as more of a filling the top of the funnel, or is it competition for your products?
It's both. It's absolutely both. But I mean, the thing is that, and really the way that we manage around that is you will get a more personal support approach if you pay us. Like, we're still going to be pushing out code. We're still going to try and help you on GitHub if we can. But that's kind of on a like as available basis. Whereas if you pay us, that is literally our job to help you, and we will move heaven and earth to make sure that we can. We try really hard on GitHub as well. I spend a lot of time on GitHub. But at the end of the day, bills got to get paid, and that's not a bad thing. That's how we pay people. That's how we continue to develop the product. And I think just kind of recognizing the fact that drawing a line somewhere for community support isn't a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you're a traitor to open source. It means that you need to focus on this so that you can continue to put out great open source software. But people have to get paid for this. You can't pay your mortgage on goodwill in the open source community. So
I'm curious, as CEO, what measures you follow, and are there any community measures that you track? Like, do you track the size of your Snipe-IT unsupported community adopters, or is that something that is outside of the scope for
I would love
for your job?
No, I mean, absolutely, I would love to. Unfortunately, GitHub kind of doesn't doesn't make that particularly easy. You know, they don't really say this number of people have downloaded and installed your product. So we kind of have to, also, we've got like third-party bundlers, like I think Softaculous and Cloudron, which I just heard about, and a couple of other ones where it's sort of a one-click panel for hosting companies where their customers can say, yes, I want this. And so I don't know how they install that. I don't know if they install it via Git, because they're not usually transparent about what their install and upgrade process is. So like, if they're not even hitting Git, then even if GitHub did let us track that information, they would be skipped. I have absolutely no idea how many free open source people use us. I would love to know that number. I would do anything to know that number, but it's just not knowable at this point.
Do you both have a kind of a tension between manual development, like Roberto, you mentioned the work that you've done with storage about developing a specific tardigrade backend, and Alison, you mentioned that there's kind of this pull towards services, towards, you know, help me with my scripts and, you know, help develop my applications that are running on top of your platform. I imagine that you've got a tension there between being a product company and being a services and consulting company.
Yeah, my CTO and I argue about this pretty much all the time. He's like, "No, we're a services company." I'm like, "We wouldn't have anything to service if we didn't have the product." You know, I think we're both, and I think trying to shoehorn us in one or another is just not useful. We would not be as successful if we didn't have if we didn't have really solid service, but we also wouldn't be successful if we didn't have the products. So I think both are equally important. Probably a little bit more service than product if you held a gun to my head. But at the end of the day, I personally don't think it matters that much, that differentiation for us, at least, because we are both.
Roberto, how about you? Do you have that tension as well?
Well, actually, Filezilla, the client, of course, is a kind of consumer product, if I can say so, even if we have very large companies among our customers. But I think the best way to think about this is a utility tool. So in that space, I would rather say that any input coming from users/customers is interesting. Like a few days ago, one of these customers was asking why clicking on a specific folder in a search doesn't happen this or that. And he was actually giving us interesting ideas about things that we might need to develop. But until we will have the new server in place, because since last October, not this October, the year before, we've been largely focusing also on redeveloping from scratch the server, Filezilla server. And so I believe in that space, we might feel something like that. But for the client, it's more like, you know, download, use, and that's it. But speaking of tardigrade, in the beginning, nearly all of them were developers, and most of them part of the community of storage. Since this summer, the product became ready for prime time, so everyone can actually use Filezilla to access tardigrade backend. And from few days, just few days, there is a free tier for Filezilla users. So if you download Filezilla for free and you decide to give a try to tardigrade, you can do that at no cost. I think it's up to 1 terabyte of space.
Wow. There are two things about the tardigrade storage partnership that I'd like to dig into. One is you don't get paid in dollars, and I'm wondering how that affects your measures in terms of, you know, how liquid are these tokens that you're getting from the company? How does that allow you to, you know, to operate as a company and make sure you get paid? And the second aspect is how you've structured the relationship. Has it been custom development, or are you going to be getting a per referral fee from customers that you send towards storage and tardigrade? How are you structuring that, and how do you think it'll develop as time goes on?
Okay, so I'll try to answer the liquidity part first. In the beginning, it wasn't liquid. So we were getting tokens, storing them somewhere in a safe place, and waiting. But to be honest, we have been believers of storage technology from day zero when we've been talking to them. And even if they were in alpha/beta state, we believed it was something that was going to work. And so we were just waiting. So that money was for the future, in a way. Speaking of the relationship, without disclosing, financial details, but the agreement was we were getting paid in the beginning until it was ready for prime time because we were helping them to reach out our audience. So basically, it's what is standard marketing campaign. And from now on, the relationship will be more structured like a sort of affiliation kind of, but nothing fancy, let's say. But in the beginning was something else. And as I said, since they were giving us tokens and not dollars, there was much more flexibility. If you look at the total number of tokens they have, you might easily understand why.
Okay. Alison, something you've written about in the past, which I really liked, was the way that becoming a CEO has changed the things that you focus on day to day as an individual contributor. You talked about, wanting to, write code all day, and now as a CEO of a growing company, you've got, I guess, other things that you need to focus on. Can you talk a little bit about that transition from individual contributor to manager, handling people stuff?
Oh, wait, I was supposed to transition. I wasn't supposed to just do both and not get any sleep. I'm sorry, I did not get that memo. I mean, I'm still the lead. I'm still the top contributor to the project every day. I mean, I was pushing code at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's why I look like this, because it's very early. I think it's practically speaking, I still contribute a lot of the code, but there are also important things that I need to focus on. For example, what do I want this company to be? Who do I want this company to be? One of the things that we managed to accomplish this year was getting healthcare for all of our employees. We wanted to, not all of them, for various reasons that don't matter, but we got healthcare. We have flexible hours so that it's a nice environment for parents to be able to kind of manage their kids. And that's the kind of company that I wanted to build. The fact that we bring on juniors, that's the kind of company that I wanted to build. And so I'm a little more split now because these things really do matter. And there is certainly some biz dev. There are some strategic alliances that we've evaluated and things like that. But at the end of the day, right now, it's basically I just don't sleep a lot. I don't know. I don't know that I could ever stop writing code, because the thing is, for me, building companies and building products that's my jam. And code is one of the ways that I'm able to do that. And if I think of a cool new feature at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to build it.
I imagine there are trade-offs, though. I imagine that there are some things that you consciously have decided that you will stop doing and either pay an outside company to do for you or hire somebody to do it.
Well, yeah, I think the hardest part here is mentoring. We do have some juniors on the team, and it's very easy for me to assign something to them, and then because they don't do it instantly, like literally within 15 minutes, and that's not their fault. I didn't time box them. I didn't say I need this in the next 15 minutes, but kind of the way that my manic brain goes, where I can look at this thing and I'm like, I could have that already out on master. Like it's right there. It's right there. And sometimes that's just an artifact of the flex time that we have, where like they're actually not online at the moment. And I've done this before and I deeply regret it, where I assign something to them and then I take it back from them because I wanted it done sooner. And I need to teach myself that, like, hey, you know what? We're not curing cancer here. It can wait another hour. It's fine. And the investment that we are making in these juniors will pay off. And you just need to be patient. And unfortunately, patience is kind of not my thing. I don't know if you've noticed. It's not really on brand for me. And so teaching myself how to say, you know what, this is not the way I would do it, or this isn't as fast as I would do it, but this works for me. And kind of walking away from always being the person to get the thing out the door it is definitely a challenge. I'm still struggling with it. And every time I snag something, sometimes it's because like we're going to lose a customer if we can't fix this. And it's kind of it's a bigger thing that requires some institutional knowledge that looked easier on the surface. And that's why I assigned it. And then once I actually look at it, I'm like, oh man, this is actually bigger than I thought. And so sometimes I have to take those because it needs to be shipped literally in the next 15 minutes. But more often than not, it can wait a day, and I just become impatient, and I need to work on that because I don't think that makes the juniors feel very good.
But I imagine that hiring in a small company is you want to get people who can do a lot of things, right? You want Swiss Army knives, but you also hire because you have something that needs to get done that is taking too much of your time, or that you feel you can hire somebody to do better than you can. Like, how do you make those decisions?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is financial, honestly. You know, who can you afford? And sometimes you can't afford the Swiss Army knife because they're very, very expensive typically. And also it's kind of who we are. So as I said, you know, we want to be the type of company that can level up juniors and that will take people with almost no experience. You know, one of our juniors graduated from boot camp, not Army boot camp, code boot camp, just a couple months before we got him. And the languages they taught him were not languages that we use. So, you know, like, good that you have some understanding of how coding works and stuff, but there's a lot that you're going to need to learn because we don't use any of those technologies. I mean, at the end of the day, most programming languages are similar. So I wasn't super worried, and he's doing great. He's been doing great, but we also knew that this was going to be an investment of our time. Right. And so part of that was like, no, I want us to be the kind of company that can figure out how to propel people's careers forward. I want your resume when you're done with us, whether you're just moving, whether you got a great opportunity or whether you've just decided that this work isn't the kind of work that you want to be doing anymore or whatever. I want your resume to look amazing when we finally part ways. And so, like, we're going to be doing stuff like resume review workshops where we make sure that everybody in the company is making sure that their resumes are up to date with all the new stuff that they've learned and all their new skills and all of that stuff. And it's not because I want anybody to leave. It's just because I think it's important, especially if you have to leave. You get so stressed out that you forget what you've been working on for so long. And so I want everybody to stay because they want to stay, not because they feel like they don't have a choice. And I think that kind of transparency is really valuable. It's difficult to do as a company, but I think it's really valuable. And I think it also lets them feel more comfortable knowing, hey, you know what, this company isn't a meat grinder. We're not trying to keep you here and keep you beholden. We want you to succeed and thrive no matter where you are, whether it's with us or not. Anyway, I think I sort of went off track there. I think I sort of went off the rails there and got distracted, but I don't know if that answered your question or not.
I think it's awesome that you're doing that. It's like CV review workshops for your employees is something that it's such an obvious idea now that you've said it, but I don't think I've ever seen a company doing that before.
Well, especially for juniors, because there's so much that they learn at such a quick pace. You know, there are brand new technologies that they have never touched before that they're getting exposed to and they start to get experience in. And, you know, if you don't remember to put it on your resume, I remember when I left my last like real non-startup job, I had been there for 5.5 years, and I'm reviewing my resume, and I'm like, what exactly did I do over the last 5 years? I know it was a lot, and I know it was really badass, but I couldn't tell you what it was, like, because everything becomes a blur, and you're sort of stressed out anyway. So, yeah, I'd rather spare people that that drama.
So there's another aspect, I guess, of scaling a smaller company when you're starting is and this is particularly interesting in the case of Grockability, I think. You start off, you're holding things together with duct tape and binding and, you know, twine. And as you start to get more customers, you want to automate things more. You want to reduce your cost per new customer. Can you go through your journey there a little bit and how far you've come? I think that the move that you had to automated deployment and reducing the cost of adding a new customer is really interesting.
Well, in the very beginning, the cost of adding a new customer was zero because it was a server I already had, as I mentioned. But then once we got to be about 150 people, we switched off of that hosting environment. No, it was about 200 maybe. We switched off of that hosting environment and moved to DigitalOcean. And my was not CTO at the time. He is, in fact, my husband and CTO now. He and I had built this deployment system because we were going to Ireland, actually. And because each sign up took about a half an hour of manual time for me to sign up. And we didn't want to be on the cliffs of Moher and get a sign up and be like, oh crap, there's no Wi-Fi out here. And so mostly he put together this deployment script, which of course failed horrifically on the first sign up. But you know, we were sort of expecting it. It's like anytime you launch something, one thing's got to go wrong, or else you're going to be wondering, like, oh God, I really did something terrible because nothing is broken, and I need at least one thing to be broken. And so once we got back from Ireland, we fixed that, and that script actually still powers a lot of what we do. It's been changed over time. We call it the deployificationator because that's easy to type. But so once we moved off of DigitalOcean. We wanted to kind of sink more into the AWS ecosystem, partially because there are additional products that we're working on, and having everything in the same ecosystem was going to be a lot easier. But so on sign up, it would trigger the deployificationator with your information, which is actually sort of how it still works today. But we've built a whole bunch of tooling around it. So deployificationator is idempotent. I should be able to what we call stamp, which is effectively provisioning your account. We should be able to stamp you over and over and over and over and not have anything go wrong. So on your first stamp, it's not really any different than the last stamp. And what we do now, though, is we've got all kinds of Slack bots and things like that, which empower folks like my COO, where it's just we haven't done a full system rollout yet. And so she wants to upgrade one customer. She can do that from Slack. And so we've just kind of really built out the deployificationator to be this, it's ugly. I mean, it is not a nice looking piece of code, let's just say, but it also powers $1 million companies. So you're like, maybe it's fine. So yeah, it went from manual to broken deployment, automated deployment to it's actually it's pretty badass now. I mean, it's really reliable now, and that's awesome.
So were you checking in early in Dublin Airport or Shannon Airport to make sure you got Wi-Fi to debug a script?
No, according to him, so this is not how I remember it. I thought we were in Heathrow, but he says that we were in the customs line in San Diego. We were on our way home because we were only in Ireland for a 4-day weekend. And so we were on our way home when we got our first sign up, and we're like, well, that didn't work. But it's all right.
Okay, well, thank you both for joining me. We're coming close to the end of the time. Is there anybody in the audience who has a question for our speakers, for our guests? Roberto, before we tie off, can you Can you give me a little bit of like an idea of how your company has grown? How many people do you have working on Filezilla now, and how do you make the decisions to hire somebody new to work on it?
Okay, actually, we have 7 people now. It was interesting to listen to how they manage the hiring process, because in our experience, we have been struggling with the junior developers, and eventually decided to go only with senior developers or very senior developers, especially because we need people to be acquainted with C++. That doesn't seem to be so popular, at least when you look for developers. So it's popular as a language, but probably not so easy to find developers. So we have people working for us from Brazil to Asia. We don't mind about time zone. We meet, I think we have one stand-up per week that rarely goes above 50 minutes and never goes above 30 minutes. So very, very short, to the point. And in terms of, I was thinking what kind of advice maybe I might be able to do to people willing to do this, starting from an existing open source project. If you remember, Martin Mikos is told to have said a long time ago that the early community has more time than money, and the latter community has more money than time. And so they are more able to buy for services, what they need. I think I would suggest people to think about the same about when it comes to choose who to partner with, whom to partner with. So the idea is that the ideal partner to grow faster is someone that has less audience and more money. And if you have the audience, it seems like a perfect marriage in heaven, especially if on the technical side there is a complementarity of the two projects or ventures. So maybe not possible for everyone, but I believe in many space there is plenty of opportunity in this sense.
Yeah, it's definitely advice that I've given to people in the past, is find if you're starting a new project and you want to grow your audience fast, find companies or projects that have an audience that are proximate to yours, and see if you can leverage that audience, leverage that relationship. If there's a project that's I don't know, if you're a JavaScript project, you're going to go towards the Node.js community. You're going to go towards the React or Angular communities. You're going to try and figure out how to fit into an existing community that has traction, and use that as a channel, I guess, for communicating your project. And you're kind of doing this in reverse, right? You have the channel, and you're like, who are the companies and projects that could benefit from this audience? Yeah, I really like it.
And the other thing is that now we are thinking a lot about this. It seems to me that the whole software industry is moving fast forward to in a subscription model. And I believe the question is how to do that in a way that is a win-win for everyone. So one thing we are thinking about at this time is how to make it easier for people to move their data from one cloud to another, and without the need to download and re-upload the files all the time, because people is complaining bandwidth is a scarce resource. So I see a possible direction for us, but I believe it's a general question. So after you start the venture and you start doing some business, the next question is how I can make this a subscription model and make this a win-win for everyone.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for joining me today, and congratulations on building 2 great companies. Thank you very much for sharing your experience. I know it's hard to build an open source company in general. It's hard to build a revenue stream around an open source project, and you've both done, I think, pretty wonderfully.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So next week we will have the topic will be consulting on open source strategy, So my colleague Leslie Hawthorne will be interviewing 3 people who are well known in the open source world: Sumana Harihareswara, Aaron Williamson, and James Vazil, to talk about how you structure a consulting offering approaching larger companies who have less experience with open source, and really helping raise the water level, raise the level of knowledge of open source and community in the industry. So I'm looking forward to that. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And talk to you all soon.
It was a pleasure. Bye.
Bye.